Hey everybody, I'm Marcus Hazelwood, and welcome to Clear Haze Exchange. I'm an energy engineer with over 15 years of experience in sustainability and energy efficiency consulting. Many find these topics a little complex, so I created Clear Haze Exchange to help provide clear, actionable insight, clearing the haze, so to speak. We'll cover plenty of topics under the umbrella of energy efficiency and sustainability. Let's get into today's conversation. Welcome to another episode of Clear Haze Exchange. Excited about our guest today, Greg Kwak. He's a vice president of business and product development at Diversified Biotech, a Massachusetts-based company creating sustainable lab consumables that help reduce plastic waste in science and healthcare. For over 2 decades, Greg has led product design, regulatory certification, research and development focused on green materials that meet the high standards of research labs. He's also My Green Lab ambassador, worked to connect science and sustainability at every step of the product lifecycle. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Marcus. I appreciate you having me.
Yes, we met at I2SL, and I came by your booth. It caught my eye, so I came over and wanted to learn a little bit more about what you do, and it was really interesting to me. And so you gave me a rundown on your product. So I'm looking forward to discussing more detail because, again, with this podcast, really looking to help our listeners understand some of the complex topics around energy efficiency and sustainability. And this product is really, really intriguing. So you've been with Diversified Biotech for over 20 years. So what's really kept you hooked in this industry and all with this work?
So, just to back up a little bit before I came to Diversified Biotech, I have a business background. When I originally went to college, I decided I wanted to be an accountant, and that was great for the first year. And then after that, we got into things like auditing and tax and subjects like that. And I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? So, fortunately, in my sophomore year, they created a new major, which was accounting information systems. So that bridged the gap between accounting and computer information systems. So all of the enterprise software that we have today, back then, it was sort of new and unique. And I bring that up because I went from college to a position auditing, then to a position at, of all places, Deloitte and Touche. At the time, it was Deloitte and Touche. And as I sat there, I thought, I'm going to be sitting here, I'm going to be auditing these controls, and this is what I'm going to do until there's an opening somewhere else. And I decided that it was too compartmentalized for me. It was too corporate for me. So I wanted to find something a little bit more flexible. And that's where I found Diversified Biotech. We've got a great culture here. We always have. When you get responsibility, you do a good job, you get more. And it has a very much so a small business environment. And that's really what I was looking for, the opportunity to do more than one thing. So to answer your question, the reason I've been here as long as I have is that I've had an opportunity to do product development, marketing, technical writing. I've melted things before. I've had the opportunity to do hands-on solvent testing and things like that. And it's also allowed me latitude to solve problems, which is something I really enjoy doing as well.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. What I like to say with individuals that are in college, whether they either stay in their field or pivot to a different field, there's always value in whatever you're learning. Business is business everywhere, and it seems like you found that with your current company. So, from that background and into more of a science industry, what makes lab products sustainable from a scientific point of view?
I think when we look at labs and research, really what we need to do is look at the inputs, right? In our case, with our product PlanetSafe, it's the material inputs, polymers. Um, in the case of research and tying it to equipment, what are you doing with that equipment? Where are you getting your energy from? Are you being responsible in minimizing the amount of energy that you use? Do you turn off what you need to turn off? Do you leave on what needs to be left on and minimize that impact? And the same with water, right? So the inputs that go into the research, I think, is really where where the sustainability is found, right? And those small changes, like putting down the sash hood when you don't need to have it all the way open and turning off things that need to be turned off, um, make a real big difference. It only takes one snowflake to start an avalanche. And I kind of feel like that's where we are now. With programs put out there by My Green Lab, informing researchers really about these small things and small changes that they could make, that really helps adjust those inputs, whether it be things like a material or the energy or the water going into it.
And that's a really good point is understanding the efforts that go into these products. So how do you test new materials? How do you test to make sure that they perform just as well or better,
Mhm.
than traditional plastics?
So I'll sort of remold the question a little bit, um, to give you a better answer, more informed answer. But uh, we work with one specific material. So in looking at the materials that were available when we decided we wanted to move into this area, we needed to look at materials that were available, and there were certain characteristics that needed to be that applied. So was this material something that was available at scale? Was it a commercialized material? Was it a material that um, the manufacturers had a commitment towards? It's great to have things in small batches. I'm sure I could find a laboratory out there that might be making something sustainable out of seaweed, let's say. But that's not something that you can use to make the change that we're looking to make and replace traditional plastics. So we really settled on polylactic acid, or PLA. So that's a resin that is created with the sugar that's, in our case, specifically extracted from sugar cane.
Hmm.
So that's the roundabout way to answer your question, which is, since we decided on PLA, and that's the material that we're using, um, we test products rigorously the way you would test any scientific consumable. So in our case, we work with INSERM, which is the NIH equivalent in France. And we work side by side with them, and they're in the process of doing rigorous scientific studies to make sure that all of the practical applications for our products are being tested, so that when I walk into, or when I talk to a researcher and they have those questions of, well, this is something that is organic. So is it going to hold up to what I do in the laboratory? Is it going to affect my cells in the case of our cell culture ware? Are there going to be any adverse effects on my research? So we would do what any laboratory would do when they were trying to, say, change a component to one of their SOPs. So we put it through the rigorous testing that it's going to see in the laboratory to ensure that when a customer gets the product, it's something that they can rely on. And with something that's plant-based, that's a difficult message to send. But our goal with PlanetSafe is to provide a product that is a one-to-one replacement for what researchers are currently using right now. Like one of those old commercials, you're probably too young, but where they used to take one kind of coffee, say it was an instant coffee, and they would have people taste it, and you have to guess which one was which. And their point was it was difficult to tell because theirs was so good. So we want to be able to do that. We want to be able to offer researchers a one-to-one replacement for the consumables that they're using, so that they can focus on their scope 3 emissions and really tackling the root of the concern, which is plastic is just not good for the environment. Plastic is just not something that is an equitable thing to produce. So how do we stop using it?
But what kind of products are you providing or replacing the lab use, for people that may not be familiar?
So right now, PlanetSafe is focused mostly on cell culture wear. So one of the interesting things about PLA is that it doesn't react or work the same way as a polystyrene does. So if you were to take at the beginning of your, say you're making labware, let's say you're making a 9612 microplate, and you go to the beginning of the injection molding process, And instead of putting in your polystyrene, you put in PLA resin. What you're going to have at the other end is a mess. And I can attest to this. So in figuring out how to work with PLA, it turns out that our process of manufacturing and irradiation creates a more wettable surface that is amenable to adherent cell growth. So our products don't need to be plasma treated. Our products don't need to be coated. That's something that we were able to patent. So because of that patent, we tend to focus on cell culture wear. So 6, 12, 24, 48, 96 well microplates, 150 millimeter cell culture dishes, things of that nature. Down in the pipeline, we've got flasks and roller bottles, all sort of in one form or another in the development pipeline. One of our first products was a wayboat. So it's something that researchers use a lot of, and it was a good entry point for us. You know, the people in our industry are risk averse, so to be able to offer something to them that isn't going to be in contact with cells, that they can try out and see for themselves that it will work just the way they would expect their typical product to work.
So in terms of the life cycle of this product, is it less energy intensive to produce, or is it a swap out of a certain material with a similar process? Or are you seeing further reduction in the process of development?
So one of the things we wanted to do with PlanetSafe was approach replacement of traditional single-use plastic consumables from the most sustainable and transparent position that we could. So from a material production standpoint, if you look at a life cycle assessment for polystyrene and you compare it to a life cycle assessment for the PLA resin that we use, you're looking at a 90% reduction in footprint, cradle to gate. So that process of making the resin is tremendously more or tremendously less impactful on the environment. So that was step number one. We needed to find material and a partner that was committed to sustainability. You can't talk about sustainability without talking about equitability. So how are the people who are creating the product or the inputs, how are they being treated? How is the process of creating that product or that material affecting the environment around where it's being created? So we found a very committed and excellent partner in Total Energies Corbion. So they are manufacturing the PLA resin in Thailand, again, from sugarcane. So this is a plant. You can get PLA resin. You can make PLA resin out of several different things like corn, things like sugar beets, and things like sugarcane. The issue with things like corn is that now if you're using that, you're drawing something away from the food supply, right? Sugarcane is something that when you use it to create PLA, it's actually more efficient. So you get more resin out of less product per acre than you would with the other plants. So at Total Energies Corbion, they focused on, okay, how can we use this crop and be more sustainable about it? So when that sugarcane needs to be processed, they actually built their processing facilities closer to the field. And then when we convert it, so when the sugar is extracted, there's all these byproducts, right? So the majority of the byproducts that result in the manufacturing of PLA are being reused in other areas. For example, some of it can be used as fertilizer in the fields, in the sugarcane fields. Some of it can be used on site to produce energy. And they do it to such an extent that there's enough energy that they can sell it back to the grid. Wow. So from a material perspective, when you compare what is typically in the lab versus the PLA, it's a big win because the production of the material has a tremendously lower footprint. And even the inputs that go into that, the water that's required, and the energy are offset by the processes that Total Energies Corbion has implemented. way. So when you look at a PlanetSafe microplate side by side with a regular microplate, you're looking at something that by the time you're done with it, let's face it, most of the time, because of the biohazardous nature of research, those products are getting incinerated. So if you carry the process all the way from the material being made through the incineration cycle, and you compare the footprint and the outputs there, PlanetSafe product is 87% less. So the carbon footprint of PlanetSafe, once you're done with your research and you incinerate it, is 87% less than what is typically expected from a polystyrene microplate. So it's important that we're transparent so that when companies and individuals have these questions, we can say, okay, we know that our process is equitable because Total Energies Corbion has a third party come in and they certify, Bone Sucro, they certify that the people who are working on these plantations and in these facilities are being treated fairly, that they're working in safe environments.
Good. That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned earlier what this where this is categorized in terms of emissions, and you mentioned scope three. For anyone who's not familiar, scope three emissions is a very challenging emissions to track because a lot of the products that are being used in a facility separate from their utilities. When we think about emissions, we usually think about electricity and gas. It is a portion, but one of the largest portions is scope three, and a lot of things fall into this. So it's really good that you gave more context because the life cycle piece is important, and you mentioned the equitability, and that's a very, very important point as well, because you can't just say this is sustainable because everything is much lower impact on the environment. It has to be, what is the source that you're pulling this from to develop it? So that's very important. What about the cost aspect of this? What is the cost of this product in comparison to a typical plastic?
Right. The age old concern of, well, if it's environmentally friendly, then it's going to cost twice as much or three times as much. So as I mentioned before, the process that we implemented to be able to make an optically clear, temperature resistant product out of a plant-based material gives the product certain characteristics. So between the manufacturing aspect of it and the irradiation aspect of it, hydrophilicity or wettability or the favorability of a surface to grow cells goes up exponentially. So that allows us to offer a product that doesn't need to be coated. And that strips out a layer of cost that would normally be there.
Mm.
So one of the things that we understand is that we have to make these changes now. If we are going to be providing a plant-based alternative to single-use plastic consumables in the laboratory, we shouldn't be slowing that progress down. So from a pricing perspective, what we try to do is is offer a product that is equivalently priced to what you would typically see on the market. Now, there's 1,000, 10,000 different pricing structures out there because some laboratories have been around longer than others. But from a structural perspective, we feel that if we can start with what we know to be the market price of um, everyday consumables and everyday cell culture ware, that's a good starting point.
Yeah,
So I would say that our products you'll find are typically comparable to what's already available on the market.
that's good. Yeah, and it checks all the boxes here from a sustainability standpoint in terms of the three pillars, which is people, profit, planet. That people piece where you talked about the equitability, and then the environmental piece where you said there's a 90% reduction there. Conversations that I have with professionals like yourself, the profit piece has to make sense because a lot of people aren't familiar with the language, the scope one, scope two, three, the net zero, and especially environments that I'm in. I'm in the Midwest. They're not as popular. The terminology has to be approached differently. So there's a lot of moving parts around this. What I really like about this is that you're checking a lot of boxes, really all the good boxes with this product. But what makes Diversified Biotech's approach different from other companies that are looking to take the same approach and check all these boxes?
So I would say, at least speaking about it generally, there's some great companies out there who didn't want to disrupt the science, right? So there's companies that focus on recycling products that are able to be recycled. There's companies that are focused on reusing products that are able to be reused, and that comes out of necessity, right? Because the less you can affect the science or the protocol or the everyday work that researchers are doing, the better. We wanted to come at it from very much so from a more disruptive standpoint. We want to solve the problem. I heard it recently. We're all, in terms of sustainability, we're all playing different instruments, but we're playing the same song, right? So we all want a positive impact. We all want change to come. So I would say that Diversified Biotech via PlanetSafe has tried to really solve that problem of that plastic problem, right? Some people who want to point out that there are downfalls to anything that's single use. Want to go back to glassware, which is a noble thing to do, but at the pace research moves today, it's just something that's not really an option. Maybe at the university level, but when you're talking about biotech and pharma companies, the option to do that just doesn't exist. So we wanted to be disruptive uh, to that issue, right? We wanted to say what is the reason that we can't change that why we can't offer a plant-based or a sustainable replacement for these plastic products. And that's why, we started this process in 2017, and it's been a long road. We've learned a lot along the way. Like any development process, there were roadblocks, but we held on to that commitment that we wanted to solve the problem, right? We wanted to be the company that made that offer to researchers and said, listen, if you're willing to try this, what we've developed is something that eliminates that need for single-use petrochemical-based plastic.
Hmm. Wow, that's good. So, with that said, how long did your organization take to get this product to market? Was this something that the company was started based on, is taking a plant-based alternative, that challenge and making it a reality? And what was the timeline in developing and making that happen?
Sure. So diversified biotech itself has been around for over 40 years. Um, Temperature sensitive labels, cryo tags, cryo babies, tough tags, um, unique novel products that help researchers with their everyday research and make it easier. And in 2017, we had noticed that our our recycled material reagent reservoirs were sort of gaining traction. And we said, okay, let's take a look at what's going on. And about that time, you started to see the sustainability movement sort of bubble up towards the top. And there were those initial rumblings on a wider scale that, the impact of research was something that wasn't necessarily positive for the environment. And where could we make changes? So we took a look at that and we thought, okay, where could we move in this space that makes sense for us? So the very first product we ever made out of PLA was a lab scoop, something that was, you know, 100% plant-based. It was a single-use product. We did some designing around it that made it more functional than a regular lab scoop, and we released that. Then it was the whey boats. And we stopped and we said, okay, where else can we go with this? And at that time, I had a conversation with Allison Paradise, who was running My Green Lab. Um, you know, she started it, and at that time, she was still there. So we had a conversation. She said, there's really a lot of things like petri dishes that labs go through that could stand to be replaced with something that is more sustainable or plant-based. So I said, great, and like any, a positive person, I said, this will be terrific. We'll take care of this, and labs will be more sustainable, and it'll be great. And again, going back to the earlier part of our conversation, where you can't just take PLA, dump it in a hopper, and make petri dishes on the other end.
Yeah.
that took some time. So I would say we started that process in 2017, 2018, and it was probably 3 years, 2 or 3 years before we brought, at the time, Petri dishes to the marketplace. And even that, we were thinking, well, where can we go from here? And it turns out that Petri dishes are great, but in 2025 now, in 2021, let's say then, Petri dishes cost pennies, right? So it's difficult in that aspect to take something that it comes from a plant-based material and offer that to researchers. And that was about the time we were developing the concept around cell culture. So we had determined that there were these advantages to what we were doing. And we were trying to figure out the best way to turn that into a product. Because again, you just can't do something over here and have, the perfect result over there. So that's when we took a step back and we said, all right, well, let's focus on cell culture because it solves that pillar, right, of cost. So that's what we did. It's been about 6 or 7 years at this point. So now when we innovate specifically, or when we develop products specifically in the area where we are now, it's much faster. So when I say that, it took us 10 months to figure out, first of all, can we make a 384 well plate out of this material? If so, how do we do it? Okay, now we're ready to do it. Now, what we don't want to do is find out that, when one of our products goes to market, or even in the testing phase, that researchers get it and they say, well, there's this issue here, right? I expect that, the the angle of the well to be a certain way, and it affects my cells poorly. So we slow that process down, I think, and make sure that um, what we are offering to the researcher is exactly what they expect and what they have been using already.
That's good. In terms of consumables, just to simplify it, if I'm an organization, we ordered a lot of paper plates and we use a lot of them. What would be the amount of consumables, I guess, on a percentage base that this product covers? Is it a large portion of what labs may order? Is it about a smaller portion? How would you answer kind of that question to kind of grasp the scale?
Sure, it's tricky to answer because it varies so much. But I would say if when I say we focus on cell culture because it's an excellent place to start for us. I would say that our pipeline now covers the majority of what cell culture laboratories or labs working in cell culture are going to need. I say that with a caveat. There's always a slight variation on something, right?
Mhm.
But in terms of from a majority perspective, we'll have, and we either do or will have microplates, uh, dishes, cell culture flasks, roller bottles. So that covers the majority of what cell culture labs are using. Now, our hope here is that, when PlanetSafe takes hold, when we can convince those researchers that we actually have something that is as reliable as a polystyrene part, let's say, and it is a one-to-one replacement to the consumables that they're currently using, our plan is to branch out into those lower risk items. That low hanging fruit consumable that for the researcher is a much lower risk, a lower barrier to entry for them in terms of risk. We'll branch out into those areas as well, because that's the goal. We know how to work with the material. We know this material can replace what's out there. We want PlanetSafe to be that, right? We want researchers to know that when they buy a PlanetSafe item, they'll have certain things. It'll be plant-based. It'll be equitably sourced and produced. It will be transparent. So when their emissions accountants come to them and say, "Hey, I need paperwork for this," it'll be available. whether that be an LCA, whether that be certifications, any of those things. So from a cell culture perspective, I would say that in the pipeline, we cover the majority of it. And our goal is to branch out as PlanetSafe becomes more and more adopted.
That's good. So the ability to cover a large portion of their an organization's scope 3 emissions really is to be able to take a good portion of ongoing consumables and show a better alternative, making their operations more sustainable in terms of the environment, also comparable to profit, and of course the people piece. That's good. I think there's a lot of value when people can understand the depth of benefit to these types of products, to where it goes beyond just meeting your needs at your organization level, that it can go beyond that and show a larger impact. When we start talking about ESGs, environmental social governance, and then we're talking about sustainability, it's not just something to be good to the environment. It's something that makes more sense, that is more sustainable, like you mentioned. So what are some of the lessons learned within the 7 years or so, or was you
Yeah,
said
yeah.
8 years or so, and bringing this product to development?
The goalposts always move,
Mm.
and that's okay. One of the most interesting things that I've taken part in this process is how a lot of people haven't heard about PlanetSafe yet. But I can tell you that it has grown as a brand very much since we started this process. And by that I mean it starts out with, this is plant-based, it's better than what you're using. And they say, okay, what about if I incinerate it? Well, let's find out what happens when it's incinerated. What's the difference there? Okay, but what if I have to throw it away? So that goalpost keeps moving, and that's why I'm happy to have the conversation about equitability and transparency, because we've positioned ourselves in a place where we have uh, positive answers to those questions, right? Even now, and I understand it, I say carbon footprint, and I give you percentages on carbon footprint because people who listen, they know what carbon footprints are,
Yeah.
right? They likely know what the equivalent carbon emissions per ton means, right? Like what the global warming potential means. But there's other factors. There's eutrophication, acidification, there's land use, there's water use. These are all things that you and I know are reflected in an LCA, in a life cycle analysis. And when I say carbon footprint and someone says, well, carbon footprint's only one part of the equation, I understand that from a messaging standpoint. But when that goalpost moves, that's the advantage that we have working with the partners that we do and working with this particular material. And not only this material, but this material made specifically from this plant. So that's what I've learned, right? That goalpost will always move, and transparency being key. Right.
Mm.
Someone might see this podcast and say, that's really nice. That guy knows what to say. He knows how to present what he's trying to do. But all that information is there. All that data is there. Can I hand you an LCA today? No, but I understand that that's important and that will be available. Can I provide you even the scientific data, right? Which is important because sustainability is irrelevant if we're messing up the science and you're getting bad data from our product. Especially in sustainability. It changes every day. We're at a point now where we're no longer walking. The industry is sprinting, right? So that goalpost moves every day. I went to a sustainable materials conference about a year ago in Germany, and had everything that I knew, working in life science, sustainability, with a a plant-based consumable. I had all that knowledge, and I sat down. And at the time, I was sort of awestruck because these other industries had popped up around sustainability. We're talking about scope 3. One of the things that makes it difficult is accounting for it. How do you do that? right? It's a lot easier when you can say, um, all of our delivery vehicles are electric vehicles now, and here's the difference that makes. But when you're talking about that sort of up and down, working on your scope 3 emissions, it's difficult to track all of that. So there were companies that were there talking about, here's how we do it, here are the databases that we manage, and here's what it can provide to you. So those goalposts, again, out of necessity, have been moved and continue to move, and that's something specific to this product line that I've learned along the way. And it's important too, right? The number that we always hear is 5.5 uh, 5.5 million metric tons of plastic waste are produced by biotech and pharma companies globally. That's 55 large cruise ships. That's over 700 747 jets. I just did these numbers the other day
Wow.
for messaging purposes. It's millions of people, right? And that's not going away. That's not going down. The pace of research goes up exponentially, and the need for single-use plastic goes up exponentially as well. So we can try to recycle as much as we can. We can try to reuse as much as we can, but until we offer researchers, again, the researcher looks there and you swap it out, and they never know the difference, right? Until we can offer them something that is a one-to-one replacement, we're not going to make too much of a dent in the problem. So that's a long-winded way to say, um, I've learned that those goalposts always move, and you're never done developing. You're never done innovating, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I had a conversation with someone in the UK on this podcast where he was talking about innovating in a way of recycling those plastics and turning those into fuel. But again, back to your point of scale, there is a lot that's already out there. And as you mentioned, on the track that we're on, it's going to continue to grow. So either way, it's good to find an alternative, but we also still have to fix what's continually being produced, and find a more sustainable way to make it a full circle without continual outputs that are causing or having a negative impact on the environment. That makes sense.
Yeah, and you touch on circularity there, and one of the things I like to do is tell everybody, let's go on a trip, right? Let's hop on the magic carpet and let's go to the future. Okay, PlanetSafe is in lots of labs. We continue to work with our partner, Total Energy's Corbion. And one of the reasons for that is they don't stop innovating. So they have actually developed an advanced recycling method. It's basically hydrolysis. So they can take their parts made out of their PLA, they undergo hydrolysis, and what happens is it breaks it down to the original lactic acid that was already there, and they build it back up again. So when you recycle regular polymers like polystyrenes, polypropylenes, things of that nature, mechanically they degrade over time the more you recycle them. But the beauty about the PLA is that with this process, they can do that. They can break it down to its original components and build it back up again. So I can tell you they have an LCA for the material that we currently use to make PlanetSafe. They also have an LCA for material made from that process.
Mm.
And I know I saw someone who had brought up the concept of carbon, something being carbon negative, and how
Yeah.
that was, how can someone claim that? Well, I would never say that if we made PlanetSafe out of this material that our product would be carbon negative. But the process that goes into recycling this PLA and reconstituting it into resin has been shown to be carbon negative.
Mm.
Okay. So now we'll stay on our magic carpet. We know that there's companies out there that offer you the ability to reuse consumables, and they come out and they're suitable for all of your scientific applications. So let's say you have one of their solutions in your lab and you buy a PlanetSafe product. Okay, and you know that you're already ahead of the game in terms of all the boxes on the LCA, right? It's much more environmentally friendly. You take that product, you do your research, you put it in one of our friends' machines, it cleans it, you reuse it. Now you're not cutting it in half, but now you've taken that footprint of the PlanetSafe product and you've reduced it even more.
Mm.
So wash it again, reduce it even more. And maybe you wash it a third time, maybe you don't. But that last time you wash it and you take it over here and you drop it in this bin that's provided. That bin then goes back to our partners and they chemically recycle it. And we've developed this circularity,
Mm.
right? And then we take the resin that they're making out of that recycled product, and we're using that to make our products. These are things that exist today that we could do, right? We could take PlanetSafe, we could reuse it in a Granova machine, we could reuse it in an ion field systems machine. And then once it is no longer a biohazardous item, it can go to this advanced recycling facility and be turned into a carbon negative material that can be reused. So that's another thing too. We talk about the goalpost moving, right? That comes up as well. It's not enough that something would be plant-based. What about the circularity aspect of it?
Yeah.
So that's something that even recently, really sort of diving into it, that I was able to see a path forward. Because if you take something that's considered biohazardous, our researchers, they're going to need to incinerate it. And the step now is either it goes directly to an incinerator or it gets autoclaved and then incinerated. So you think, well, what if you autoclaved it and then sent it for hydrolysis? Well, scientifically, chemically, molecularly, that doesn't work because the process has already started in terms of the product breaking down. So you actually need that product in its original state for the hydrolysis to work. That's why there's that step that's required where our friends that are in the reuse area could be part of this process. So
Yeah.
that's the magical mystery tour I like to bring people on. But the I call it sustainable scalability.
Yeah.
We're sustainably scalable. So we're preparing now for the ability to do more advanced and more sustainable things in the future. So I can sit here and tell you right now that if you take a PlanetSafe microplate, 96 wells, that typical, density of microplate, and you send it to an industrial compost facility, it'll break down. It's certified to be industrially compostable, which is terrific, but you can't compost it because it's not food waste or food waste adjacent, yard waste or yard waste adjacent, so it can't get certified by your BPIs or your CMAs, and therefore industrial composters won't take it.
Mm.
But when we have truckloads of this in terms of waste, when we have, a consistent flow of this waste that could be composted, then that changes the conversation, right? It changes the conversation for the people, making the laws around composting, or even the composters themselves.
Yeah.
So it could be that future exists where there's enough product in the marketplace that it could be industrially composted. And that's something we wanted to prepare for. Now, when the day comes, we want to position our products to be scalable so that they could be composted. They could exist in a circular environment.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
That's good. Well, I really appreciate your time, Greg. This has been a really informative conversation about the science behind your product, which is amazing to hear because there's a lot of progress in looking at products and finding ways to produce them better so that they're not making our environment worse, but also finding alternatives that are less energy intensive in terms of resources that we're extracting from the environment, but it's been great hearing about the science behind Planet Safe and the true sustainability behind it, how it connects to the lab facilities, organizations. Very important research is being done, and this product really helps support what needs to be done and what's being done now. So thanks for showing us what is possible and clearing the haze around how products in the research world can be more sustainable. I certainly invite listeners to follow Greg either on LinkedIn and learn more about Diversified Biotech's sustainability mission, what they're doing in this market. Truly, some great work here, and I look forward to seeing what more your company has developed. So thanks, Greg, a lot for coming on the show.
Thanks, Marcus. I appreciate the conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to Clear Haze Exchange. New episodes drop every 2 weeks. You can catch Clear Haze Exchange on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and more. Let's clear the haze about sustainability and energy efficiency together. Subscribe now and join the conversation.